The cassette tape arrived with no return address, wrapped in brown paper that felt soft from years of handling. Robert Redford found it on his doorstep in Sundance at 11:23 p.m. on a Tuesday in October, when the Utah air carried the first bite of winter and the silence of mountains settling into darkness. He almost didn't pick it up. At 87, unexpected packages made him cautious, but something about the careful wrapping, the deliberate placement exactly centered on his welcome mat, suggested this wasn't random. Someone had driven up his private road, past his gates, past his security, to leave this here for him to find. Inside his study, Redford held the tape up to the lamplight. No label, no writing, just a standard cassette, the kind that hadn't been common for 20 years. He still kept an old player in his desk drawer, a relic from his directing days when he'd recorded notes to himself between takes. He slid the tape in and pressed play, static first. Then a voice, young, male, nervous. "Mr. Redford, this is Danny Kowinski. You probably don't remember me. I was one of the extras in the Milagro Beanfield War. Background actor, scene 37, the courtroom scene." Redford's hand moved toward the stop button, then hesitated. Fan mail came in many forms, but rarely on cassette tape, delivered to his private residence. "I'm making this recording because I'm dying, sir. Lung cancer. Doctor says I have maybe 2 weeks, and there's something I've been carrying for 36 years that I can't take with me." The voice paused. Redford could hear breathing, careful and labored. "It's about what happened during filming, about Jimmy Montoya, about what you saw and what you didn't say." Redford's chest tightened. Jimmy Montoya, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in decades, but one that lived in the spaces between his thoughts, in the pause before sleep, in the moment between waking and full consciousness. "I was there that night, Mr. Redford. I saw everything, and I know you saw it too." The tape went quiet except for the soft hiss of magnetic ribbon turning against metal heads. Redford stared at the machine, his finger hovering over the stop button, knowing that once he heard the rest, there would be no unknowing it. "I kept quiet because you kept quiet, because I figured if Robert Redford didn't speak up, then maybe it wasn't my place either. But I've been wrong about that for 36 years, and now I'm running out of time to make it right." Redford pressed stop, set the player aside, walked to his window and looked out at the darkness between the trees. Jimmy Montoya had been 19 years old in 1987, a kid from Espanola, New Mexico, hired as a local consultant for the Milagro Beanfield War. Not an actor, a guide, someone who knew the land, knew the people, could help the production understand the heart of the story they were trying to tell. Redford remembered him clearly now, thin, quiet, wore the same flannel shirt every day because it was the only good shirt he owned, spoke 3 languages fluently, but always apologized for his English, which was better than most people's. Had a way of looking at the mountains like they were old friends telling him secrets. The film had been important to Redford, a story about ordinary people standing up to power, about the value of community over profit, about the dignity of those who are usually dismissed as inconsequential. It was also a story that required the cooperation of local landowners, local government, local people who had reason to be suspicious of Hollywood promises. Jimmy Montoya had been their bridge to that cooperation. His family had lived in the area for generations. His word carried weight. 3 weeks into filming, Jimmy had come to Redford's trailer after a long day of shooting. It was late, past 10 o'clock. Most of the crew had gone back to their hotels, but Jimmy had waited standing outside in the cold mountain air until Redford emerged. "Mr. Redford, could I talk to you?" It's important. They had walked away from the trailers, away from the lights, toward the edge of the set where the desert began. Jimmy had been nervous, choosing his words carefully. There's something happening that you need to know about. Something that could hurt people. Jimmy had explained about Bill Harrison, the location manager, how Harrison had been taking money from local landowners in exchange for guaranteeing that their property would be featured prominently in the film, how he'd been inflating location fees and pocketing the difference, how he'd been promising local businesses that they'd be featured in the movie if they paid him consulting fees. It's not just the money, Mr. Redford, it's the promises. People here, they don't have much, but they believe in your movie. They believe it's going to tell their story. Harrison's making promises he can't keep, taking money from people who can't afford to lose it, Jimmy continued, his voice steady despite his nervousness. Redford had listened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a familiar coat. This was his film, his vision, his name on every piece of marketing, his reputation tied to every decision made by every member of his crew. Do you have proof of this, Jimmy? Some. Harrison's not careful about who he talks around. He thinks we don't speak English well enough to understand what he's really saying, but I've been keeping track. Dates, names, amounts. Why are you telling me instead of going to the police? Jimmy had looked at him with the kind of directness that cuts through all pretense. Because the police around here, some of them are taking Harrison's money too, and because you're the only person with enough power to stop it without destroying people's lives. Redford had promised to investigate, had told Jimmy to keep documenting everything, to be careful, to trust that the right thing would be done. But the right thing had proved complicated. Harrison was more than just a location manager. He was connected to the studio, to the completion bond company, to the local government officials who had approved permits for the production. Exposing him would mean delays, investigations, possible shutdown of the entire film. The movie was already over budget. The studio was nervous about Redford's vision, about whether audiences would embrace a story about Hispanic farmers fighting against development. Any scandal, any controversy could provide the excuse they needed to pull the plug entirely. Redford had told himself he needed more evidence, more time, a cleaner way to handle the situation that wouldn't destroy the film in the process. 2 weeks later, Jimmy Montoya had died in a car accident on the mountain road between Española and the film location. Single vehicle crash. No witnesses. The kind of accident that happened too often on dark, winding roads where young men drove too fast and took chances with curves they thought they knew. The investigation had been brief. Accidental death. No evidence of foul play. Jimmy had been drinking, according to the police report. His blood alcohol was just over the legal limit, enough to explain delayed reaction time, impaired judgment, a moment's inattention on a dangerous road. Redford picked up the cassette player and pressed play again, steeling himself for what Danny Kowinski had waited 36 years to say. "I know you fired Harrison after Jimmy died," the dying man's voice continued, "and I know you tried to do right by the community after that. But you never told anyone what Jimmy had found out. You never told anyone that he died trying to protect people." The voice paused, and Redford could hear the sound of labored breathing. "I kept Jimmy's notes, Mr. Redford, all of them, names, dates, amounts. Everything he documented about Harrison's schemes, I kept them because I thought someday they might matter. Someday, someone might want to know the truth about what happened." Another pause, longer this time. "Jimmy's sister Maria, she's still alive. She's 65 now, never got to go to college like Jimmy wanted. She works as a cleaning lady in Albuquerque, has 6 grandchildren, still talks about her brother like he was a hero." Redford closed his eyes. Maria Montoya. He remembered her from the funeral, 16 years old, standing beside her mother, trying not to cry. She doesn't know what Jimmy was doing before he died, doesn't know he was trying to help people. All she knows is that her brother worked on a Robert Redford movie and then he was dead. And now she's old and she cleans other people's houses and she still wonders if her brother's life mattered to anyone. The tape was running out. Redford could hear it in the change of sound quality, the way the voice seemed to be coming from farther away. "Mr. Redford, I'm leaving these notes to Maria in my will. Jimmy's notes, everything he documented. She deserves to know what kind of man her brother was. But I thought you deserved to know first, in case you wanted to tell her yourself, in case you wanted to be the one to let her know that Jimmy Montoya died a hero." Silence. Then, "The address is in the package. Maria Santos, that's her married name. She still lives in New Mexico, still remembers you." The tape ended with a click. Redford sat in his study until dawn, watching the Utah mountains emerge from darkness. At 87, he had lived through decades of moral complexity, of choices that seemed clear in the moment, but revealed their true weight only with time. That afternoon, Redford called his assistant and asked her to find an address in Albuquerque. Maria Santos, née Montoya, age 65. "Is this for a film project, Mr. Redford?" "No," he said quietly. "It's personal." The drive to New Mexico took him 6 hours. Time to think about what he would say to a woman who had spent 50 years not knowing that her brother had died trying to help others. Time to consider whether truth delivered decades late was mercy or cruelty. Maria Santos lived in a small house near the university with a garden full of flowers and a front porch where children's toys suggested frequent visits from grandchildren. When she answered the door, Redford saw Jimmy immediately. The same dark eyes, the same careful way of studying a stranger's face. "Mrs. Santos, I'm Robert Redford. I worked with your brother Jimmy many years ago." She stared at him for a long moment, then, "Jimmy's been dead 36 years. I know. That's why I'm here." They sat on her porch as the New Mexico sun set behind the mountains. Redford told her about Jimmy's courage, about his investigation, about his attempts to protect the community from exploitation. He gave her Danny Kowinski's notes, everything Jimmy had documented about Bill Harrison's schemes. Maria read through the pages slowly, her hands shaking slightly. When she finished, she looked up at Redford with tears in her eyes. "Why didn't you tell anyone this before?" Redford had prepared many answers to that question. About the complexity of the situation, about the need to protect the film, about the lack of definitive proof. But sitting on her porch, looking into eyes that held 36 years of unanswered questions, all those explanations seemed hollow. "Because I was a coward," he said simply. Maria nodded slowly. "Jimmy always said you were different from other Hollywood people, that you cared about truth more than money. Jimmy was wrong about me." "No," she said quietly. "He was wrong about when you would find your courage, but not about whether you had it." They talked until the stars came out. About Jimmy's dreams, about the sister he had wanted to send to college, about the family who had grieved for him without ever knowing the full measure of his character. When Redford finally stood to leave, Maria walked him to his car. "Mr. Redford, what will you do now with this information?" Redford looked back at her small house, at the life she had built despite never receiving the opportunities her brother had died trying to provide. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The people Jimmy was trying to protect, most of them are gone now. The corruption he exposed, it's too late to prosecute. I can't undo what I failed to do." "But you can tell his story. Would that matter to you?" Maria considered the question. Jimmy used to say that the only real failure was being forgotten. As long as someone remembered what he tried to do, his life had meaning. 2 months later, Robert Redford published an article in the Santa Fe New Mexican titled "The Courage of Jimmy Montoya," a belated acknowledgement. He wrote about the young man who had died trying to protect his community, about the investigation that had been silenced, about his own failure to honor Jimmy's courage with truth. The article created no major headlines, no careers were ruined, no prosecutions launched. The people Jimmy had tried to protect were mostly gone, scattered by time and circumstance. The justice he had sought was decades past claiming. But Maria Santos framed the article and hung it in her living room next to a picture of her brother, taken a week before he died. And when her grandchildren visited, she told them about their great-uncle Jimmy, who had been brave enough to stand up for what was right, even when powerful people preferred his silence. At the Espanola Public Library, a small plaque now honors Jimmy Montoya's memory, donated anonymously by someone who understood the value of remembering those who die trying to do good. Robert Redford never spoke publicly about the article or about his meeting with Maria Santos. At 87, he had learned that some redemption is private, some truth is personal, and some courage comes too late to change what happened, but not too late to matter. Legacy, he came to understand, is not about the stories you tell the world. It's about the stories you should have told but didn't. It's about the voices you should have amplified but silenced. Some questions have no answers, some failures cannot be undone. Some silences, once broken, reveal not redemption, but simply the true weight of what was lost. But courage delayed is not courage denied, and truth spoken late is still truth spoken, even if it comes 36 years too late.